Um, yeah, so we can get started here. All right, can everybody see my screen okay? Awesome. I am going to talk a little bit about interface design specifically, but we'll touch on UX, we'll touch on art, we'll probably laugh. Hopefully no one will cry. I may fall asleep because it's 9:30 my time. So, you know, if I do, just somebody poke me and we'll go from there. So yeah, I suppose I should introduce myself. My remote's not going to work, so we'll do something else. Okay. Hi, my name is Bryce Howitson, and I went to art school. Hi, Bryce. No, it's okay, right? I think most of the time when we think of artists, a lot of us have these kind of preconceived notions, right? Jackson Pollock, is that art? Is it not? It's a splatter painting. It's ginormous. Fun fact, it's still wet. Like that's a little weird, right? Or maybe when we think of artists, we think of some of these. Picasso, Van Gogh. Am I kind of touching on what you think of when you think of artists, art school? This is sort of where I came from. And the problem with that is that I kind of always identify with this artist. Now, there's a fun story here. Deadpool's probably not the artist that you were all thinking of. But where I went to art school, watercolor, specifically things like what Bob Ross did, was considered a sub-art. It wasn't good enough to be part of the art school crowd. So why am I talking about this? Why am I here to say, hey, let's talk about UI design, let's talk about UX, and I'm admitting to being an artist? Well, there's a big important part here where the differentiator is kind of the intent. If you're like me and you think that art feels like it's probably not quite the right term for a lot of the things that we do today, that's okay, right? Instead, let's just talk about practicing safe design instead of art. So when we talk about design, what is it? Guess what? I don't know. But I can tell you what it's not. Okay, when I think of design, especially when we're talking about interfaces, experiences, customer experience, any of that kind of stuff, art is definitely not subjective. What that means is that you can test it. You can find out if it works or if it doesn't. It has a purpose. It's also not something that we just create for the fun of it. As the designer, your feelings, your political commentary, what you had for breakfast, all that kind of stuff, all of those things that we think of around art gets downplayed a little bit. And instead, the purpose is communication, or it's in interest of serving some other bigger goal, if that makes sense. In the case of UI design, it's usually to do things like convince somebody to click on things, or to spend their money, or to get information. And then finally, it's not random. I showed you Jackson Pollock. A lot of that may or may not be random. I don't know. But it looks random. It looks as if the artist took a bucket of paint and dumped it on canvas. When we talk about UI design, especially, it is not random, right? We are considering every single piece of everything we do, and we're trying to have reasons why we did it. There is something really cool about this, though. There's something really special about differentiating between art and design. I'm guessing that most of you, if I said to raise your hand, would say, nope, I'm not an artist. It doesn't fit with the way my brain works. Well, lucky for you, we're not going to talk about art. We're going to talk about design, and you can learn to do design. The reason you can learn to do design is because it's not subjective. It's not self-serving. It's measurable. It's intentioned. Okay. So think of it more like a science. You can do experiments. You can find out what works and what doesn't, instead of hoping that someone will buy your painting and hang it in a gallery. Nothing against artists. I know some very good ones. In fact, I know some artists who have a philosophy that I think that we can copy. This is that philosophy. I remember this, actually, art school. I had a prof that came up and said this. Said, good artists borrow, great artists steal. What does that mean? Well, in our case, it means literally stealing things. I'm guessing some of you have seen Andy Warhol, painted some soup cans, kind of stole the design and the idea, just a little. Here's the thing, though. This artwork was last sold in 1996 for $15 million. Now, in today's money, that's $28.5 million. That's a lot of green for a bunch of soup cans. And the reason that that's important is because that means that all of us, we can sit down and we can say, this is not a direct lift, right? Obviously, Warhol put his spin on this stuff, but it's okay to learn from the experts. It's okay to take things that function really well and use those. In fact, we'll even talk about it in a little bit, but it's okay to use a design system. It's okay to use a UI kit. It's okay to do those things. And I'll talk about that why in a little bit, but this is kind of the spot where everybody gets to decompress a little bit, take a deep breath and say, you know what, this is okay. I can learn how to do this stuff. Real quick, before we go too much further, I am going to talk primarily about user interface design today versus user experience design. I practice both on a pretty frequent basis, but my difference is that the user interface design is pixels. It's typography, it's spacing, it's color, it's things like that. These are all things we can learn, again, but that's very different from figuring out the flow between things. You will use some of the same ideas to figure out the flow as you use to decide where things go on a screen. But our goal right now is to take a project that you might be working on and give you some tips and tricks to make it feel a little better. Okay. I'm sure we've all been in that position where we think, wow, I've got this great idea for a project and it feels just a little bad, for lack of a better word. I don't like the colors. I don't like the fonts. It feels wrong and I don't know why. My goal is to give you some tricks that will help you figure those things out and kind of move forward with best practices. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about those best practices. There are things called design patterns. Design patterns could be anything from, say, a sign-in flow to an onboarding process. These are kind of like the UX pieces of it. It could be the common way that a shopping cart is shown. What icons do we use for shopping carts? How do I know that I can put my credit card here? Or it could be a date picker. Like how do I show a range of dates? All you have to do is ask Google for design patterns. There are thousands of them out there. Look for some that there are things called like UX pattern libraries. The Nielsen Norman group has a bunch of patterns that you can use. The catch here is kind of from the very big picture, don't try to reinvent the wheel, which is actually surprisingly hard. We all look at things and we're like, I'm going to do this my way. And most of the reason that we do that is because we just don't necessarily know what the patterns are that exist. So start there. The next level down, especially as you start to talk about UI design, is instead this idea of a design system. This is a kind of a buzzword and catchphrase right now. We have actually had design standards for years and years and years before this caught on. We just didn't apply them to screens quite the same way. What's really cool is that there's a whole bunch of these out there. I'm guessing most of you have heard of things like Google's material design. As a Google developer expert, I should probably talk about that. But there's a lot of other ones. The one you're seeing on the screen here is called Polaris. It's from Shopify. What these are structures for how you combine elements into something that looks really good and functions really well. You don't have to use Material. You don't have to use Polaris. You don't have to use the Microsoft version. You don't have to use the Squarespace version. You don't have to use any of these. But they're there so that you can start to understand how things go together. I really love the idea of Material. I don't know if anybody's ever said this to you, but material design isn't about pixels. It's not about shadows. It's not about roundy corners. It's all about hierarchy. So they created this idea that the things that feel closer to you are more important and the things that are further back are less important. They're using pixels and all kinds of stuff to make that happen. All right. So let's say that you've got some patterns you like, you understand how they work. You found a design system and you feel relatively comfortable with some of those pieces, or even you want to customize your own. That's great. The next question is always, well, I'm a coder. Where do I go? What do I do? I'm going to tell you, it is okay. I'm sorry, those look really washed out. I don't know why. It is okay to use a UI kit or a framework, right? Bootstrap's the big one. We all hear about that. But there are all kinds of other ones. When you're looking for the right UI framework, there are a couple important things. Number one, is it designed for your target medium? Right? So, for example, Bootstrap is not really designed for mobile devices. Probably don't want to use Bootstrap if your entire goal is something for a phone. Look for something that works for your phone. The second one is that it works with whatever technology you have picked, right? If you're going for Angular, make sure that you've got something for Angular. If you're going for web components, make sure you've got something that works with web components. A couple quick Google searches will show you all of these things, and you can kind of go from there. I guess we could be done, right? Talked about how I'm an artist, you don't have to be. Gave you some design patterns and said go for it. Should be done? No? Okay. Well, from here on out, let's go for some quick tips. Let's make those things that you make look even better. How do we do that? Number one, hierarchy. What does hierarchy mean? Well, it means putting the most important information front and center and showing me that it's the most important information. Here's an example. Look, it's my bio. Cool, right? All the fonts are the same size. There's a little bit of spacing there. It's not too hard to read. But I also don't know what's most important. Let's say that I was building a LinkedIn clone and I wanted to show my bio. Look at the difference. Really, what we did is we used size and color and a little bit of positioning to show you what's more important and what's less important. All right, the social media stuff is red, you can see it, but it's also at the bottom and it's smaller. My name is big. Now you can go and find this on the screen. Quick and easy stuff, but we forget it really easily. How about this one? Other than that, I like the number one. This is one of those things I really want you to remember. In general, give a screen one job. Not 10, not N, give it one. I'm going to show you the difference. It's really obvious. What am I supposed to look at here? I mean, there's kind of a big picture of Joe Biden. There's a search bar, there's weather. What am I supposed to do here? It's pretty obvious, right? You're supposed to type something in the search box. Giving things one job means that the UX part of the process is a lot easier, and the UI part is actually a lot easier. The one catch is you can't be scared of all that space around everything. So how about the words? It's really easy to say, well, just put stuff on a screen, make it the right size and things like that. But we talk about words, and always when we talk about words, we talk about typography. Anybody love picking typography? Anybody hate picking typography? Here's the thing. Typography and your content go together. You can't have one without the other. But where do you go if you don't have an art degree? How do you pick these things? Well, let's start with a big one. There's a thing that I like to call expressive fonts. These are the fonts that make you feel something. It's like that word expressive right there. It's very decorated. It has that one has kind of a, say, maybe a Western vibe a little bit, sort of that woodcut look. You can kind of imagine what goes around it, what emotion you want to create. Now, I'm not saying don't use these fonts, but be very aware of what emotion it is you're trying to create when you use them. Google Fonts has all kinds of these. Be very careful with them. Use them sparingly, because they are going to affect the way people interact with the thing that you've built. Next question is always, well, if I'm only supposed to use expressive fonts very sparingly, but I have other words that I would like to convey, how do I do that? Well, we have something that's called font pairing. Now, one of my instructors in art school used to say that fonts are like your shoes. Do you go to a job interview or let's go even better. Do you go to a formal black tie event in a tuxedo and flip-flops? Probably not. Do you go to the beach in a tuxedo? Probably not. The catch here is that there are groupings of fonts that work really well together. And I'll give you a list of, or I'll give you links for some of these resources in a little bit, but you don't have to go hunting for those. You can find them very easily. They exist. And just like these are Google fonts, for example. They're showing what they call a display font, which is usually used for headlines, and a body font. You could use the same one if you wanted to. I would suggest that you don't. Instead, I would suggest that you only really ever use two different font faces and maybe 3 or 4 weights. I know that feels limiting, but the more we limit ourselves, actually, the more you will find that it's easier to communicate with these tools. So pick no more than 2 fonts, pick 3-ish font weights, and then stick with things like sizing and color to differentiate hierarchy. Finally, there's this big question. Anybody know what serifs are? Latin, it literally means decorated. So when you look at a font, this is a serif font. It's got the little like feet, if you will, off the bottom of letters. Serif fonts are really good in print because they let the ink kind of settle in a way that creates lines for our eyes. They're not so great on a screen because the pixels kind of blur them out, especially with smaller sizes. They're pretty good here, but again, for legibility reasons, we only have 3 or 4 words on a line. It's really not that big a deal. Like your eye can follow where it goes. So by all means, use serif fonts, but understand why you're using them and where you're using them. And the reason that I say that is because the most important piece here, I think, is legibility at the end of the day for UI design. You need people to be able to read what you've written. There are a couple tricks for that. One of the easiest ones is basically setting your line widths. You see the kind of the red bar there in the middle? That's between 40 and 60 characters long. That is the ideal length for copy. So you kind of don't want people reading all the way across a 8K monitor, right? You get one sentence and it goes all the way around, and you kind of like you move your head, and it gets not fun. This is how you circumvent that, and it's one of those little details that actually makes your thing feel much better than the one beside it, and people don't really know why. Yeah. I will share my deck with the group after this, so all of these are available. But if you want the font pairs that we talked about, that's fontpair.co. And then Material actually has a really cool understanding, like why did we do the things we did and how do they work section, including the one on typography, and I highly recommend that if you really want to go further. Okay. All right, so we got typography. Let's talk about all the rest of it. This is how things interact. Where do they go? What do they look like? I don't know about any of you. I grew up in the prairie in North Dakota. This is not comfortable for me. I don't dislike people, but when I get crammed in, I struggle to focus. I struggle to understand what I should do and where I should be and how I should interact. The exact same thing is true about the layouts that you create. So, for example, this one is pretty compressed. It's not bad. We're using color. We're using hierarchy. I'm using a mix of serif and sans serif type. I even did some things like I made all of the links a certain color, right? So you know what you're quickly trained to figure out what the action is. But when we compress everything down, we start to tend to do some weird things. Notice how there's some containers there. If you're trying to draw my eye to that center item, I've got a background, we've got some lines, we've got a lot of extra stuff that's really just kind of getting in the way. If instead we give this thing space, we let it breathe, everybody's got a scroll mouse, it's not a problem. Look how much better that feels. We got rid of a bunch of those lines. You still know exactly where you can interact with things. We move the nav from the left crammed up against the logo to the right where it's got space for you to understand that it's navigation. These are quick, simple, easy tricks. The best thing is it applies across the board. This is probably not something that you think very much about. The bigger the text is, the more you should spread it out. So that right-hand column, it's not super noticeable here when they're next to each other. But on the right, we've got 0.5% spacing. We've got, 4%, 1%. It's that little bit of consideration. Remember, we talked about how design is considered. It's that little bit that makes it so much easier to read and engage with this, and it changes the entire feeling. So for headlines and things like that, think about space between the letters, kind of stretching them out a little bit. For body copy, think about space between lines, giving it a little bit more room to breathe. So the paragraph on the right is same font size in both cases. It's spread out a little bit, and it's got 1.4% or 1.4% of increase in line height. Otherwise, it's the exact same thing. Look at how much easier it is to read that right one. How about we talk about something completely, well, exactly the same as UI design. Sorry, wrong slide. This is a design talk, not a tech talk. But you know what happens? Artists, designers, we actually like containers. How many people have seen stuff like this, right? You start to you start to try to separate things, and all of a sudden you've got shadows on everything and boxes around everything, and then more boxes and more boxes. What you've got Docker problem, right? At this point, you have too many containers. So what do? Well, let's take a few of those out. It's surprising how much better things feel when you use containers very sparingly, right? Now we have a text box that's obviously a text box at the top, but it's got a full width wash of color behind it instead of the boxes that we had, right? It's not this. I know exactly what the header is. I know what to do with it. I know what the body area is. I know what the add button for an image looks like. I'm quickly aware that because things are on the same line, they are the same element and I can do something with them. But you see how much different that is. It's the same content again. I keep talking about the same content, and there's a reason for that. The other big trick is consistency. Try to use the same font sizes. Try to use the same colors. Try to use the same spacing. In fact, I would go as far as saying use all the same things as multiples, right? So in this case, we've got a base size, typically your body copy. The base is 16 units. I'm going to make sure that I use multiples of 16, so 24, 36, 48. I'm going to give my biggest, most important text a 48 unit height. I'm going to give my body a 16 unit height. It's typically nice to go 2 to 3 times your body size for your headlines. But see how I'm using the exact same system, and I'm using it in the same way all the time. Every screen, every piece, use a system like this until you find a spot where you can't. I challenge you to do that because I think you will find that it's really hard to find a place that this system doesn't work. The same thing goes for padding, margins, spacing. Use the exact same amounts everywhere. So here we've got 24 units between the headline text and that input field. We've got 24 units of spacing around everything for padding. We've got 24 units of margin. You see how it starts to feel very intentional? And there's a kind of a secret here too. And that secret is that the more consistent you are, the easier it is to code. So those of you that are enjoying writing things, making code, making it appear on the screen, the more consistent it is, the better and easier time you will have making that happen. Paint. I've got a dirty little secret. Maybe we should stop the recording here for a second. I went to art school. I detest picking colors. Like, that is the worst thing. Had to do branding in the past. I've had to do, all this like look and feel stuff. I hate picking colors. Don't tell anyone. Do you remember our conversation earlier? Remember that slide that I got in art school? Good artists borrow, great artists steal. Now maybe you know exactly where the color scheme for my presentation came from. Leave you with that one for a little bit. Here's the cool thing. There's all kinds of stuff with colors all around us. There are entire applications that will let you take an image and it'll tell you what colors break down into it. Adobe has some really cool tools that will give you color inspiration. They'll help you figure out what to match this color with and that color. Just like fonts, pick 2 or 3. Don't go overboard. And in general, when we talk about it, you will find that you have a primary color that represents a 70-ish% of your design. You'll have an accent color, which is 25 to 30-ish% of your design. And then you will have, in most cases, an action color. This is a sort of a UI specific thing. But it's if the action color is the same across the board, or like the same one or two. So for example, on the far left one, can you see my mouse? I don't know if you can. This one on the far left, there's kind of green and sort of a there's the teal and sort of the salmon color. Those are action colors and they're obvious. The middle one, the yellows are kind of an action color. Zendesk is using black, but they're using color around the action items. That's super helpful for people because it teaches them very quickly how to use the interface you've created. So that's one of the easy tips is don't go overboard on color. Pick those three, use those three. Things will work way better than you thought. Now, I'm sure the next question is, okay, pick those three colors. How do I know that they work together? Or better yet, how do I know that people with disabilities can see them, or there's enough contrast, or things like that? I went to the University of Minnesota. Our colors are maroon and gold. Try running those through a color blindness test. They're horrible. They don't work at all together. So how do you do that? Well, Material actually has a really cool tool that will show you different, they call them weights, just like we do with fonts, from a very bold, which is a very dark version of the color, to a very light version of the color. And they can actually show you from the colors you pick how you can stack them, which colors are which and why do they work together. You pick two colors and it's going to give you that. And I have a link to that tool again in a little bit. Finally, I keep coming back to this, like, what is a considered UI? How do we make it look intentional? The thing that we do very frequently is we take complete black text and we put it on top of white, or we take complete white text and we put it on top of black. It's actually really hard to tell the difference, but it's significantly easier to read the very light gray text on black and the very dark gray text on white. I rarely use more than, say, about a 90% opacity. So you've got all full black, I will use 90% full black on top of white very frequently, and I will use, say, 5 to 10% white on top of black. Most people, if you put them side by side, would see the difference. But if you just look at the thing that you've created with those kind of with those lighter gradations, it feels more comfortable. It's easier to read, and people like it a little better, even if they don't know why. So this is another one of those little tricks you can use to just make your design feel a little cleaner, a little better. Unfortunately, I have to leave you with a warning. It's really a bad idea to swap colors when they have a meaning, right? Stop in green really messes with your brain. Let's go in red, not great. And I don't know if anybody who's going to look at a blue warning and think, oh no, I've got to change that. Okay, so keep that in mind. Color has meaning. I don't have anywhere near enough time to talk about all the meaning that color has, but that's just an important piece of it. So here's our list of all our colors. Again, there's a couple material links there that are really cool. Adobe's or color.adobe.com has trends, has color palettes that other people have made and people have voted on. Here's a pro tip. Go look for the ones that have a lot of upvotes and use those colors. Easy peasy, no more picking colors. So I want to leave you with this. Question everything. What do I mean by that? Well, I really do want you to question all of this. One of the best things about design is that you can learn how things work, and then you can decide that it doesn't apply to you and to your project. That's okay. But what we're doing is we're saying we have to know why it works before we can decide that we want to go the opposite. Okay. And because I'm going to leave you with question everything, now is the time for questions. I actually see one in the chat right now, River. You said, how likely are you to use coding for UX and UI design? Well, I write code almost every day. Currently, my job title is software engineer. Would I have to write code to be a UX designer? No. But I look at it like this. When I went to art school, digital cameras were barely a thing, but Photoshop was a big deal. And I sat down and I looked at the Photoshop interface, and there's all these icons that mean different things. When you hover over the icons, they say things like dodge and burn. We playing dodgeball? Like there's no wrench in the interface. I can't dodge the wrench. I've got to like, what am I doing with this? Well, once I finally took a photography class where we did darkroom work, I found out that dodge and burn actually means you leave the light on for longer and it exposes more and it gets darker. And dodge is kind of the opposite of that process. I never would have been able to put those things together without that photography class. I kind of think it's the same thing for code. Can you design really cool interfaces? Yeah, you can. Look at Dribble. Dribble is full of cool interfaces. I would say, though, that 95% of the stuff that's on Dribble can't or shouldn't be built. And it's all because the person that's making it doesn't have any concept of what that means in the actual production process. So do you need to write code every day? No. Do you need to understand how font sizing works in your target medium? Yeah, very much. So that you're not creating something that the engineers can't make. And then in addition to that, there is an awful lot of benefit from building prototypes. Like, it doesn't have to be the full thing. You don't have to ship all of that code. In fact, I frequently tell people that I'm a little worried that they ship my production code because I'm not a trained engineer. I don't think about all of those pieces. But what I do very frequently is I build all of these prototypes so that we can quickly figure things out. You've heard that, a picture is worth 1,000 words. I think a interface that you can click on and move around and prototype in is worth like 1,000,000 pictures. So there are low code ways of doing that. There are no code ways of doing that. But I think that it's worth knowing how the pieces go together, even if you don't use it every day. Makes sense. Do we have any other questions? I thought it was nighttime here. I was supposed to be the one that went to sleep, not all of you. Yes, interface is worth 1 billion words. Thanks. Somebody got the math on that one. Did I learn how to code after undergrad? I did, actually. My day-to-day is JavaScript, which is, we'll leave the semantics of what's a scripting language versus a coding language to someone else. I already got beat up on the artist versus designer debate, so we'll leave that one alone. But I use JavaScript a lot. I use CSS in HTML frequently. Most of what I build are web apps. But I learned how to do that after my kind of in as part of my undergrad, specifically because my CS major friends told me the stuff I was designing couldn't be built. And I didn't believe them. I did make a few things that couldn't be built, but I also proved them wrong in a few cases. But it's kind of a worthwhile way to find out if that thing in your head does work. You get the benefit now that you can ask Stack Overflow how to do things. You can Better
My
yet,
sister is stupid.
you can ask ChatGPT how to write code. You can do all kinds of things to find it, to get code in front of you. It's not the barrier to entry isn't that high to get something. So I would certainly suggest doing that. Sorry, I'm trying to go through all the comments here. What is my favorite part of the design process? That's a good question. I can tell you my least favorite is picking colors. We covered that one already. My favorite, I think, it's actually the end. Now, this is going to sound kind of funny, but I love getting to see people use the things that I've made and finding out where the assumptions were wrong. I just built something where the entire thing, it's a process tool. And the entire part, the most important thing is making a new submission for this process. So we put a giant button in the the middle of the nav, like at the top of the nav, right under our logo. It looks amazing. It's clean. It says the words, like new submission right on it. And I've watched a whole bunch of people just like not be able to figure out how to make a new submission. Honestly, that's my favorite part of the design process, because the cool thing about UI design, especially for screens, it's not like making a book. You don't have 5,000 copies printed and stuck in your garage that you have to change. You can change it right now. You can tweak it and make it better. So it's also my favorite process set is the end, but it's not the end because design doesn't have to be done either. If that makes sense. So the process and criteria that Google followed for determining the standard spacing and design patterns in its various platforms and applications. So they took an entire team and they sat down and they said, how does this design system work, right? How does it work for video? How does it work for a regular screen? Like I want Gmail to look a certain way. I want YouTube to feel similar. They looked at all of those different pieces and then they started to say, well, what are the commonalities? They did a lot of work, and Apple's done a lot of work in this same space too, to just kind of say, what are the baselines, right? How big should a button be? Well, a button should be big enough you can click on it. What does that mean? Well, it's a different size for your thumb on your phone than it is for your pointer on a web app. They did a whole bunch of research. They got people in rooms. And this is kind of why I say that you should go with some of these pre-built systems and some of these pre-built tools. Google spent probably millions of dollars to figure that stuff out. I don't know about you, but I don't have millions of dollars to spend on it. So let's take something that somebody else created and kind of go from there. Coordination between a UX design team and a UI design team. So there's an assumption there. And the first assumption there is that you're working with a very large organization, that you have completely separate teams. I've worked in a lot of organizations that are, say, 500 or fewer people, where it's not a separate team. The UX designer and the UI designer are working together on things. Sometimes they're even the same people. I think the bigger coordination is typically between design, whether it's the UX portion of that or the UI portion of that, and engineering. Because what happens in many cases is you will say, okay, we finished our design, here it is, now somebody go build it. This sort of fits into that knowing how to code piece as well. Do you have to do it all the time? No. But when your engineering team and your design team, and you get together, everybody likes burritos, everybody's hanging out, everybody's having lunch. How do you talk a somewhat similar language? I think that is a bigger problem than the UX design team and the UI design team not meshing up. In general, I have not seen UX teams that feel like they're being scientists and UI design teams that feel like they're being artists and butting heads. That is probably just due to the background and the way that the work output needs to be done. But in many cases, you'll have somebody, a UX designer, who will do things like wireframes and flows. The wireframes are roughly how big should something be, where should it live on the screen, and then you'll have a UI designer that revises that and enhances it. Right, we're going to make every headline a specific font and this color and these line heights, and we're going to apply that to the wireframes that are created so that you have a more finished looking design that comes out of the other end. So it's more of a polish typically. But then again, we've got that design to engineering handoff, and that's a much bigger piece. If you're lucky and you can work directly with the engineers, you can circumvent a lot of this, but otherwise you have to create very descriptive documentation that says, here's exactly what it needs to do, and here are all the different states that it needs to be in. And when you click on it, it needs to move here and do this. That is the place that, depending on the organization that you work with, you will find very different applications of that process, and some of them are good and some of them are really not. Sorry, that didn't really answer the question, I'm sure. What are your thoughts on minimal design? I think we should go back to that slide that I had about what design is not. Right? Design is not random. We have gotten to this point with some things where we kind of went overboard with design. I mean, we've got so many shadows. I remember several years ago when Apple's Game Center had a green crushed felt background that was supposed to make you think you were using a billiard table or you were playing cards somewhere. That's one extreme. Everything goes in cycles, so we've looked at that one extreme and we've kind of gone the other direction now, and we've said minimalism. I am going to say there is not a right or wrong answer. That's not the cop-out. It's that there's a right or wrong answer for your audience and for what they need. Do you have people that have a hard time seeing? If so, strip away all the extra stuff that gets in the way of them seeing the thing you need them to do. Do you have people who, like, are you working with photographers, for example, who are used to seeing very clear definitions or very clear reproductions of the world around them? Maybe they want something that's got more depth and shadow and kind of all that stuff that's not minimal. So it's not which one's right, it's which one's right for you for this project. So pick the right tool for the job. If that makes sense. Feel free to hit me up on LinkedIn, Twitter, or whatever else, and we can have a big argument about that if you want. But I really do feel like it's the right. You will know what the right thing is if you're paying attention to your users. All right, cool. You guys see your question? We'll get to that one. So in my opinion, what is the most crucial and in-demand skills that a UX designer should possess in order to be successful in their role and effectively design user-centered experiences? this might sound like a cop-out answer, but I fully believe that you need empathy. I think you can learn empathy, but I think you can learn all the rest of the stuff relatively easily. Now, here's the thing though. When I say empathy, I'm not saying the kind of the textbook definition of empathy. I'm saying you went to a thrift store and you bought somebody else's used shoes and you walked around in them for a while, right? Humans approach a lot of things in a lot of different ways. Can you empathize not just with your user, but with, I don't know, your product manager, your sales team, your boss? What perspectives are they bringing that may not match what you wanted to do, right? Why are they asking you to do something? That's just as important as empathizing with your user and understanding what they're trying to do. I work in many business-centric applications, right? I build tools for people, process improvement, speed, things like that. And one of the things we always try to remember is, what is it, like, what are these people scared of? I don't know about any of you, but I'm scared that someday I'm going to go to work and I'm going to like make my boss mad and they're going to fire me. I'm scared that I won't know how to do my job. I'm scared of a lot of these things, right? So when we look at how do we empathize with these users, it's how do we make tools that don't generate more work for them? How do we make tools that make them look like rock stars to their bosses? And that's kind of what I mean about empathy. It's getting to that level of knowing why you're doing something all because of somebody else's goals, needs, or experiences. That is a extremely deep topic. I'm more than happy to go into greater depth about empathy. I talked a little bit about what scares people. I personally advocate for something called a fear persona. Like I really want to know what motivates people, because most of us are motivated by our fears. And we can, if you ever want to, we can go into a much deeper conversation about that. Do we have anything else? Yeah, it is certainly possible to do that. It's really hard. I am the only Bryce Howitson that I'm aware of, and I think I'm the only one that Google is aware of. So definitely the only one LinkedIn is aware of. But if somebody has a link to it and wants to, well, look, there you go. See, look how easy that was. Anybody else? You guys let me know. You got the schedule. Just cut me off and drag me away with it.
I think if there are no more questions, we can probably end the session. But thank you so much for this. This was super insightful and I really enjoyed it. And yeah, thank you so much for everyone who came to the event. This was your first GDSC event. We hope to see you at more future events. And if you're a tech lead, it's nice to see you here. I'm going to send a link in the chat. This is only for GDSC tech lead. So if you're not one, please just ignore it. But yeah, thank you all so much for coming, and feel free to stick around if you have any questions or anything.
Also, just wanted to say that we have another workshop coming up this coming Tuesday, 8 p.m., which is about Angular, the light and fun way. So please join us for that as well. And that's by a Google developer expert, and his name is Jay Bell. So looking forward to seeing everybody there as well.
You're welcome. Like I said, feel free to connect with me and we can argue out the differences between an artist and a designer, or how they engineer to, or the different scripting languages versus coding languages. We can fight about all that stuff.